From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sonia Gray. Venezuela and China are working on a new agreement to facilitate credit for oil projects. The Venezuelan Minister of the Economy and Finance, Simón Zerpa, is currently in Beijing to discuss oil cooperation and bilateral funding. Venezuela is one of the main beneficiaries of loans from the China Development Bank. Zerpa also has a meeting scheduled with the Chinese Foreign Vice Minister.
We're working on an agreement for oil production as a main point in our bilateral relations. We got a loan from the China Development Bank for an increase in production valued in $250 million. We're also working on a special loan granted by the Chinese government valued at $5 billion to invest in oil-related projects.
And now we go to our correspondent in Beijing, Sierra Diaz, who has more.
We are at the Foreign Affairs Ministry where just a few hours ago the Deputy Minister of China, Li Yucheng, met the Economic and Finance Minister of Venezuela, Simón Zerpa. The Chinese official praised the bonds and long-time friendship between China and Venezuela. He also thanked him for the opportunity to meet in person. The Venezuelan official, on his part, praised the cooperation and a strategic alliance between them. Today, they inaugurated the 7th Technical Secretariat of the Bilateral Commission. Among the topics discussed were oil cooperation and financing. Zerpa told Telesur that the alliance between China and Venezuela is strong since Venezuela is the main country that accepts credits from the Development Bank in China, an important bank not just in China but in the world. He also said there are challenges to keep this alliance going, especially to fight against the economic war that could be triggered between the United States and China, and also the sanctions that are still in place by Washington towards Venezuela.
We thank you, Sarah, for that report. Now, in Mexico, the president-elect, Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, is expected to meet the outgoing president, Enrique Peña Nieto, on Tuesday to discuss the transition of power. Lopez Obrador said he will also meet with his opponents in the election, Ricardo Anaya, Jose Antonio Meade, and Jaime Rodriguez o El Bronco. The left-wing candidate has won 24 million votes after Sunday's elections, with over 90% of the ballots officially counted. That's nearly 54% of all votes. Meanwhile, Mexicans in the United States celebrated Lopez Obrador's victory. Supporters of the president-elect gathered in front of the Mexican consulate in Los Angeles, waving Mexican and Morena party flags. They said they have great hopes for the new administration and the policies promoted by Lopez Obrador. They are positive he will defend Mexico and their citizens against the measures of U.S. President Donald Trump's administration.
We had to leave our country because we had to escape violence or economic problems. With the change he's going to bring, immigration will stop. That's the most important thing. We will be able to decide if we stay here or go back to our country.
From now on, Donald Trump will have to calm down because he will not have a Peña Nieto in front of him. This time, there will be an honest gentleman in the chair. And he is president because the people put him there.
Newspapers flew off the shelves the day after the election that marked a turning point in Mexico's history. For the first time in over 80 years, neither the PRI nor the PAN will be in power.
Thousands gathered at the iconic Zocalo Square in Mexico City to celebrate the victory of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Early results put him far ahead of the other three contenders.
I call for all Mexicans to reconciliate, to put unity above their own personal interests, to put our country first.
As he addressed the crowd on Sunday after the polls closed, the representative for the Together We'll Make History coalition promised to defend his principles.
I've kept my ideals and my principles. They are the most important thing to me. But I have to confess that I have ambitions too. I want to be remembered as a good president.
For one analyst, the election results also show a likely majority for Lopez Obrador's coalition in both the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies.
This is the third shift of power in the history of our country. We are shifting to the left, and that has a great meaning.
Don Gregorio says he sold more than 100 newspapers in just a couple of minutes. The joy of this victory shared by many Mexicans.
Every newspaper with Lopez Obrador on the cover sold out. He was successful because he did so well during the campaign.
I'm really glad. I can feel great vibes. It's been a long time since I walked through the streets and felt an air of calm. It feels like a new energy, and I am sure this is the beginning of lots of positive things, especially for the youth.
The winning candidate took a day to rest just before the meeting he is scheduled to have with outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto. The latest numbers confirm Andrés Manuel López Obrador has won the presidency by a very large margin.
The global production of cocaine and opium have reached record highs, stemming from production sites in Colombia and Afghanistan. And while drug production is on the rise, the debate continues over how to stop this epidemic.
Some hope for repressive measures, others plead for legalization. Meanwhile, the drug production keeps growing. According to the latest report from the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, the production of opium rose by 65% from 2016 to 2017 to 10,500 tons. Afghanistan accounts for the overwhelming majority of the production, with an output of 9,000 tons.
Not only the Afghan problem, the Afghan government that is unable to fight opium and narcotics, but it's also the international community that is actually failing miserably to fight the opium products.
The U.S. strategy in the Central Asian country has not reduced the production of opium. On the contrary, it has increased since the Taliban regime fell.
Since announcing our strategy for South Asia last August, President Trump has underscored that the United States will continue to support the Afghan government and its security forces in their fight against the Taliban, as well as in their efforts to combat al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other terrorist groups.
Along with Afghanistan, Colombia is the main global producer of narcotics. Global manufacturing of cocaine in 2016 also reached the highest level ever reported, an estimated of 1,410 tons, or a 25% rise from 2015. The South American country accounted for the bulk of the production, with output increasing by more than a third between 2015 and 2016 to 866 tons. Now the country intends to return to the use of herbicide glyphosate to eliminate cocaine crops.
We are discussing the use of so-called drones, unmanned aircraft that due to their height simulate ground, not aerial fumigation, and that a series of piloted planes have been made that have given rise to use by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Environment that comply with the health and environmental conditions in order for them to be authorized.
Environmentalists and social groups reject the measure. A deeper debate looms in the fight against drugs. Continue enforcement or legalize? Progressively, more and more countries are taking steps to legalize the so-called soft drug, such as cannabis. The Portuguese parliament just legalized cannabis for medicinal use.
It opened a door for Portuguese patients to have an active voice for the first time and for political parties to understand how urgent the situation was. So for us, it's positive. It's a foot in the door, and we know now that we won't go back on medical cannabis treatment.
Cannabis is actually the most consumed drug according to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime report. The legislation of this drug with medical purposes is the first step for many on a new and hopefully more effective approach on how to deal with drugs.
We take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
criticism that has stooped so low on the part of the Republicans as well.
When someone looks at me, the bias would be to not take me seriously until I open my mouth.
Welcome back. Barbados has begun a national cleanup campaign. Teams of volunteer groups joined forces with the Army and sanitation crews to tackle drains, watercourses, and the removal of the sargassum seaweed. The cleanup efforts are also seen as preparation for the rainy season and could help alleviate flooding.
As well as youth groups as they...
The CARICOM heads of government arriving in Montego Bay, Jamaica for the 39th regular meeting. Leaders are expected to discuss the CARICOM single market and economy and disaster resilience. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel and Chilean President Sebastián Piñera will attend the conference. Jamaica's Prime Minister was named the chair of the regional body.
President Piñera is no stranger to us in our community since he interacted with our heads, I think, in 2012. And the newly elected President Diaz-Canel, of course, only having been sworn in as president, will be interacting with our heads of government for the first time, although Cuba is no stranger to interacting with our Caribbean community.
CARICOM Secretary General Erwin LaRocque said marijuana use can be recreational and medicinal, although he explains why this can be more of a challenge. Caribbean leaders are expected to discuss marijuana use at the meeting.
Certainly, the Commission encourages, in addition to decriminalization of marijuana, freeing up marijuana for scientific purposes, for medical use. Within that context, I would imagine that one could allow for trade in medicinal marijuana. And there's a distinction to be made. In the international law governed by various, starting with the UN, there's a protocol at the UN, would preclude, at this point in time, the trade of recreational marijuana. Even within the United States, for instance, you can't move marijuana from those states who have legalized it into those states who have not, unless it's medical marijuana.
In Chile, feminist groups in the University of La Frontera ended their protests after the institution approved their demands. After 2 months of protest, the Chilean university accepted demands for the creation of new protocols to deal with cases of harassment. The university also agreed to allow trans people to change their name in the university's registry. However, representatives of the feminist group said they will keep an eye on for the full implementation of the measures, or they will resume protests. And teachers in Argentina are beginning a 24-hour strike to protest against the repression of their protests in several parts of the country. The teachers' union plan to march to the Ministry of Education in Buenos Aires. They say the police attacked them with rubber bullets and tear gas in the provinces of Chubut and Corrientes last week as they campaigned for a wage increase. The teachers blame the regional governor for applying cuts demanded by the IMF. And union representatives and workers from the Argentinian state news agency Talam are also protesting massive layoffs in the company. The protesters have criticized the government's decision to sack hundreds of their colleagues and called for an ongoing strike. Journalists say President Mauricio Macri has promoted an ideological cleansing against their colleagues. The government has dismissed 357 people from Talam, almost half of the news agency workforce. The government has said this is part of the company's restructuring plan. And our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Egado Esteban, has more details.
Workers at Talam State News Agency continue to protest after the dismissal of 357 employees. The ongoing demonstrations intend to pressure the government of Mauricio Macri to revert its decision and to give these workers their jobs back. During a press conference, the workers said they are planning to take a bill to Congress to propose the government doesn't handle the news agency anymore. They have also announced another demonstration next Thursday that will go from Congress to the offices of the Media and Public Information Minister, Hernán Lombardi, to show him the rejection of the situation. Several political forces will take part, social and human rights organizations, as well as groups associated with culture and journalism. So it is expected to be very big. They also confirmed that the peaceful takeover will continue until the workers from the national news agency, Talam, get their jobs back.
In Panama, the authorities have announced that the unemployment rate has gone up. 6.1% of Panamanians are out of work, according to the latest comptroller account. It is an increase from 5.5% in 2017. In figures, that's to say 116,000 people are unemployed, 51,000 of those are between the ages of 15 and 24. Other studies have found that of the 1.9 million people who form the Panamanian workforce, 40.8% are part of the informal workforce.
These workers are not given a contract and written work and do not contribute to Social Security. Employers are not contributing to Social Security. And if you ask me how many there are, it's not a few. There are 105,000 workers working informally in formal companies.
Meanwhile, the high food import rate is putting national production at risk. Experts worry that it's leading to the abandonment of the agricultural sector, weakening food security in the country. Panama's food import bill rose to $1.43 billion. For high consumption products like rice, government imported about 30 million kilograms in 2017 and plans to import another 30 million this year. Imports of tomatoes and onions are expected to rise too. It's estimated that up to 80% of food products in the market come from outside.
A country that depends on imports to feed its people makes us vulnerable. It makes us fragile against the international economy and large transnational food corporations. It can also impact the quality of food.
Brazilians are worried about the merger of the multinational companies Bayer and Monsanto. Our correspondent Ignacio Limas reports on this development.
The merger between the multinational Bayer and Monsanto has been approved in Brazil. The new CEO of the company, Mark Reicher, is set to arrive to Brazil after the merger is approved in the United States. The new CEO will confirm Brazil as the world's second largest market of transgenics, after the United States and just ahead of Argentina. Brazil has more than 50 million hectares of crops with transgenics. Monsanto will leave the New York Stock Exchange after the merger is finalized. Several people are protesting the merger in support of social and agricultural movements, as they say the merger will monopolize important sectors of the economy, will affect people's health as well as the soil. A bill in Congress is being debated to allow the use of transgenics and restricting the sale of organic products.
We thank Ignacio Limas for that report. Campesinos in the north of Argentina are organizing against forced evictions and real estate companies that seek to steal their lands and hand them over to agribusiness.
Campesino families that have historically worked and lived in these lands are now threatened not just by the big landowners, but also by the state itself. The El Pongo government estate in Jujuy covers over 11,500 hectares. 350 families work an average of 3.5 hectares each. They have been here for 4 generations, but now the state has increased their rent.
They want to keep the land themselves, to privatize it and take away our way of livelihood. That's why the rent has gone up to levels even higher than on private land.
In Palma Sola, small farmers who live from raising cattle are being backed into a corner.
We're being trapped. We're losing our land. Everyone here is in bad shape because they take away everything. We don't have a corral for our cows. We cannot take them to graze in the open fields anymore.
We have lodged all our complaints. We have followed the law and gone to the Ministry of the Environment to demand they stop illegally taking away our property.
Campesinos in Perilagos filed for a preventative measure against a government project in Jujuy that threatens to remove them from their land.
This is part of a great real estate business promoted by the government of Jujuy. This is one of two ways the dominant classes can threaten campesino communities. The other is through agribusiness. Big landowners push us into a corner until eventually they take everything away from us.
The campesinos say they are willing to fight for their lands in any way they can.
Time now for another short break, so join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. As the world looks on in anger over the treatment of migrants by the U.S. government, reports say the British government has a history of separating families as well. Scores of children and possibly hundreds are separated from a parent or guardian in the United Kingdom every year, according to a charity that challenges immigration detention.
It's utterly reprehensible and morally unforgivable. But we don't have the moral high ground in the UK. There are lots of things to be very concerned about how we treat families and any individual who's subject to immigration control in the UK. But families can be detained, parents can be detained, families can still be detained, families with children can be detained. Now, there's a limit on the length of time that a family with a child or children can be detained in the UK, and that's limited to 72 hours.
The two medics who reached the 12 boys and their football coach trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand have decided to stay with them until they're rescued. The authorities say it could take up to 4 months. Now, several options are being explored to safely bring the boys out. One of them is to teach them to scuba dive. It is understood that most of the team do not know how to swim. The Thai Navy will supply them with 4 months of food and medicine. And fear has grown because of the rise in the water level inside the cave, as heavy rains are expected this week. In a miraculous turn of events, they were found 4 kilometers inside the cave by British divers after 10 days. The Thai Navy says they are all in good health.
There's one race against time is, can something be done to get them out before the weather changes and perhaps makes diving too dangerous? That's one thing. And the other one, it's the race to get them supplied or get supplies in so that if they have to stay in there, they can stay in there until, throughout the monsoon. Now, that could be till September, something like that.
We need to be careful not to rush. As long as the children are safe and strong, then they are in good hands. We can now reach and communicate with them, so they are in our sights.
The World Cup in Russia is not the only one currently taking place. A Kidditch World Cup was held in Florence, Italy over the weekend. 29 international teams competed in a game brought into real life from J.K. Rowling's bestseller series, Harry Potter. 2 teams of 7 players compete using balls called bludgers, used to momentarily knock opponents out of the contest, and a quaffle, which a player can put through one of the 6 ring-shaped goals to score. The U.S. team beat Australia in the final match 120-70, after Graf being the snitch, the most important piece of the game. And before we finish our show, a short reminder that you can watch our special World Cup program with the Argentinian football star Diego Armando Maradona. De la Mano de Diez, the World Cup according to Maradona, will air only on Telesur every night throughout the tournament in Russia. These are the times to watch it. Do not miss out. We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. You can also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you so much for watching.